Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hello, Patrick Donoghue here, news editor with the Irish Farmers Journal. This week is dominated by industry insight, with Bord Bia publishing export figures for 2016 and the Positive Farmers Dairy Conference looking ahead to 2017. First, the export figures. This Wednesday, Bord Bia revealed that Irish food and drink exports rose to 11.15 billion in 2016. This makes last year the 7th consecutive year of growth for Irish food and drink exports. Deputy News Editor Katrina Murphy caught up with Bord Bia's Director of Markets, Pádraig Brennan, to talk about the figures.
Pádraig, I suppose export values are up 11.15 billion. Would it be fair to say that some of that is driven by increased volumes? Is it a case of running faster to stand still?
It's certainly part of the performance is driven very much by export volumes growing, particularly in dairy, in beef and in pig meat. If you look at milk deliveries here in Ireland, they were 5% higher in 2016. And pig volumes were up by about 2%, and we would estimate that increase in volumes would have boosted the value of exports by about 250 million. So certainly that is one part of the story, but we have seen, I suppose, substantial diversification of our exports again in 2016 as well, with international markets accounting for about 80% of the growth in export value over the year. And I think if you look over the last 6 years, international markets have accounted for half our export value growth. So that ability of the industry to find new markets and develop new markets has been absolutely critical in retaining that growth, with what is now the 7th consecutive year of growth in the value of food and drink exports.
From the farmer point of view, I suppose the volume increase and price decrease is what at the end of the day, that's what matters most to them.
Absolutely. I think if you look at the two major sectors to start with, in terms of dairy, obviously went through an extremely difficult 2016. The prices really well back for much of the year. I think the silver lining is probably the fact that we're seeing a significant slowdown in global dairy supply over the last number of months that seems set to continue into 2017. And also, as we've seen oil prices start to pick up, that has helped import demand in the Middle East and the Africa region. So yes, there's no doubt with the dairy sector, they're really difficult 2016, but you'd be hopeful that the prospects for 17 are much more positive. In terms of beef then, obviously we've seen strong volumes in the year gone by. We're looking at a further increase of 6% in export volumes of beef for the year ahead. So that is going to present a challenge to the sector in terms of how it can market that product and the return that it can secure for it. So it is a difficult environment for livestock producers generally.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Katrina then spoke to the Minister for Agriculture, Michael Creed, and she began by asking him about the markets he'll be focusing on in 2017.
The markets we look at are informed by Foodwise 2025, which has identified places like Southeast Asia, the Gulf region, North Africa as particularly important hotspots for Irish food exports. When we go on those trade missions, we're never product specific, but I do acknowledge, for example, that in the current climate, obviously beef is a critical export commodity that's under pressure because of Brexit, under pressure because of the associated currency fluctuations, under pressure because of increased volumes as well. So obviously new markets in beef are important, and that's why, for example, earlier this week we opened up the Egyptian market for processed beef. That was previously a very significant Irish export destination for beef. But it's also about, like, the job of the department in terms of market access is to go out there and see what new market opportunities we can open, and then the industry follows in and does the business afterwards. So there's a lot of countries that are open now where because the returns are probably not as profitable as other markets. But as our volumes of beef coming to market increase, we obviously will be looking for new outlets. So Egypt is significant. The other very significant one which we would like to crack in 2017 would be China, and we've a lot of effort gone into that. Can I say definitively it will happen? No, but I can assure you, I can say this definitively, that it won't be for the want of trying. We've a lot of engagement at technical level, at a political level, at a diplomatic level, and that will continue.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Bord Bia has been busy in the past week, as it also held a meat market conference last Friday. Peter Duggan is the sector manager for pig meat and poultry, and he spoke to livestock specialist Darren Carty about the prospects for the two sectors in 2017.
Yeah, I think for 2017 we can be reasonably optimistic. In terms of the Irish herd, it's up by about 0.5% to around 150,000 head. But in the EU, you're talking about breeding sows being backed by around 3.5% or 350,000 head, which would be 3 times the size of the Irish herd. So there's going to be lower supplies in the EU for the first half of 2017. They're going to be backed by around 1.5% according to the European Commission. And then in China is expecting that they will have the same level of imports in 2017 as they had in 2016. So this was record levels. They imported 2.5 million tonnes in 2016. So again, be the same amount in 2017. The one slight worry, I suppose, would be that US supplies will be higher, and that's on account of the US herd being at its highest level since 1943. I suppose there's probably 3 factors. First being improving productivity, and then you have access to cheap grain. They're really the 2 main factors that would have contributed to the highest herd that we've seen since 1943.
On the Irish side and a lot of speakers said today from a positive thing is that domestic consumption seems to be holding well right across beef, lamb, pig, poultry. Same thing, how is pigs performing?
Yeah, it's performing quite positive, apart from the pork category. So the pork category is backed by about 3%, but the sausages, bacon is all up. So in response to this, we are actually phasing out our current ham and bacon ad, TV ad that we have at the moment. So the last time that will be aired will be in March 2017. So we are currently developing a pork and bacon TV ad, and that will be rolled out in May and then September and October.
On the poultry side, obviously the last few weeks have been dominated by the avian flu. And how has maybe markets performed, and is there a risk, even though it has no effect, that the whole sort of industry could be caught up a small bit with the disease?
Well, I suppose in Ireland we're lucky enough that we think we're out of the worst of it, and I think as we move towards the spring, there's probably less risk of any more avian influenza cases. So there's just one down in Wexford. But in terms of consumption, poultry consumption for 2016 performed very well. It was up by around 9%. And I suppose you had more consumers shopping the category more frequently, and they were putting more into their basket, and they see chicken as a very versatile product. Look, the Irish market has performed strongly, and I think it will continue to do so, provided that there's no more avian influenza outbreaks.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
From bird flu to Schmallenberg. 2 cases of the Schmallenberg virus have been confirmed in Ireland in the past week. So I sat down with Darren Carty to talk about the signs of the disease farmers need to look out for.
Yeah, I suppose there isn't a huge update, say, from last week, and it still continues to be isolated pockets. And it's interesting that when you're talking to more farmers, they're saying that, I thought I had a case of that over the Christmas period, but I didn't do anything about it, or that, I had a deformed lamb, but there is more, say, maybe confirmed cases starting to be reported. But as I say, it's small pockets and probably reduced this year in that there has been an even further shift away from early lamb and flocks. There's also been a few cases, and farmers are starting to look into now where there might have been maybe a cow in a suckler or dairy herd aborted, and now, say, with Schmallenberg rearing its head, they're saying that could have been a case.
They might have thought it was salmonella or something like that.
Exactly, and like in any of these cases, I suppose you might have a case of an abortion, and it mightn't be ringing alarm bells because it might be a cow hurt or a ewe hurt or that sort of thing. So people are starting to look a bit closely now and starting to, I suppose, maybe implement greater levels of supervision, but also more vigilance for the disease.
And is that Is that all farmers can do really, is just remain vigilant? If there's an abortion, that they follow through, get the testing done in the district veterinary lab, or
yeah.
whatever.
So I suppose there's a few telltale signs to be wary of. Say, as we mentioned, abortion is one, but in a lot of these cases, and particularly in sheep, ewes are bringing full time, and what you'll see is the birth of lambs or even calves with congenital deformities. And in particular, what you're looking for is sort of bent limbs, stiff necks, marked damage to the spinal cord where an animal can be curved up and seem very, very rigid.
Would this put awful pressure on a ewe to put out a lamb?
It's all dependent on what way they are. So if you can imagine now, say the normal birthing process, the lamb or the calf coming into the birth canal, if there is one limb maybe bent backwards, or if there's a deformity and it restricts the normal passage of that animal through the birth canal, well then you have a problem. And what vets are recommending, and I suppose what any of the experts are recommending on this, is that if you think you have it in an area, and as we say it's only small at the moment, that look at maybe where you might leave an animal a bit longer, if there is signs of difficulties, maybe handle a bit earlier, and then also be maybe ready to have your vet on standby, because in some of the cases it will lead to a caesarean section if the animals can't give birth naturally. As you said, that's about the only thing that can be done. I should say there is 2 vaccines manufactured. There's none of them actually available at the moment in Ireland.
Why is that?
Low usage. So our last outbreak would have been in November 2012, going into spring 2013. And for a lot of farmers, it was a distant memory. And if you take the range of vaccines now that's on the market, whether you say sheep, toxo, inzo, clostridial diseases, go to cattle, and you go IBR, salmonella, BVD.
Blackleg, whatever.
Yeah, so it's another cost, and it's a cost that I suppose after a year when there was no more of a sign of it, that you're saying to yourself, well, look, that's something that you're...
I'm out of the woods.
Yes. And as any farmer that has contracted at the moment, that's little solace to them. It's something that they'll have to decide next year, something that the manufacturing companies will have to, I suppose, maybe monitor as the year goes on, see how big of an incidence it is, and then see, well, will there be demand next year? Because in any of these things, it takes a bit of cost to bring a vaccine to the market, and it'll be the manufacturers will be saying, well, is there a payback for them?
So what are the department doing? Are they just kind of telling farmers to, if you fear anything or have any thoughts, get in touch, or kind of wait and see type thing, is it?
So the recommended protocol for a farmer to get an animal, say, booked in for a post-mortem in one of the RVL labs is to go through your vet. What the department, I suppose, in any case, what they'll say is that the quicker the animal can be brought into them, the better, the more accurate it has, whether this be Schmallenberg or whether it be any disease. The fresher the sample, or if it's a case of abortion, the more of a sample you can bring in, the fetus, fetal membranes, that sort of thing, the better a chance you have of making an accurate diagnosis. So the department are working on that. They're also dealing with some of the herds or flocks that have animals brought in so far, and there is some surveillance going on with that.
So, and then finally, Darren, how does it get here?
So there's a different trail of thoughts. Say, originally when it came from, it's named after Schmallenberg, a town in Germany, and it came all the way across different countries into England and then across to us. Some people will say that it might have never left Ireland, that it could be in pockets, but that the midge, so it's spread by midges, and that there may not have been midge activity. Some people would say that it was probably could have gone back and been more confined into pockets of England, but hadn't been seen. And one of the trails of thought is that we did have a very mild autumn last year, and maybe there was activity later in the year, and it infected more animals, because what it does is, if animals are, say, bitten and they're infected in months 2 and leading into month 3 in sheep, and months 4 in particular in cattle, and maybe leading into months 5, that's where your risk of your deformities develop.
Perfect. Darren, said you exclusively revealed that story on Schmallenberg in last week's Farmers Journal, and you look at it in management notes this week.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Now to County Cork and the Positive Farmers Dairy Conference. The title of the conference seems apt in light of the recent remarks made by Ornua's Chief Executive Kevin Lane, who is forecasting an average milk price of between 30 cent a litre and 33 cent a litre for farmers in 2017. Lane gave an interview to our agri-business editor, Owen Lowry.
Yeah, we've had a very interesting discussion here and some very good Q&A with the farmers at the conference. Our best estimates at this stage, and we don't have a crystal ball, but we've given our best view based on forward contracts, on businesses we've done, on prices we've fixed, that we're hopeful that we will see an average milk price during the year for all of 17 of somewhere between that 30 and 33 cent, which would be a very, very significant increase on, let's be honest, what was a terrible 2016 for most dairy farmers.
That's quite a positive sign for farmers going into 2017. What's the big drivers behind that price increase?
Okay, I suppose it's positive from where we've come from, but I would put some caution on it, because we have, as we explained in the conference, we have a lot of unknowns out there at the moment, not least Brexit, which will be negative, the US administration change, and whether that will have an impact on the good quality business that we have in the States, and indeed whether that price sustainability can be maintained at higher dairy prices. We normally see that when you're selling into the emerging markets at prices 2,600, there's a large spike in demand because of the affordability factor. When you start selling in, as we will be this year, dairy prices between 3,000 and 3,500 a tonne, that could affect the actual return. So I would say it's good that we've moved to a more positive phase, but I wouldn't want farmers or anybody to get carried away thinking that there is going to be a bonanza out there or a very high returns, because we will have peaks and troughs, and while we're at the right side of it for 17, I don't know any commentator that's going to go much forward into 18 and expect something similar.
Butter volumes have surged to the United States in the past year, seeing Kerrygold butter now being the number one imported butter into the United States. Are you concerned around the administration change and the new president coming in that it may impact volumes or levies or duties being imposed on imports of Irish and European butter?
We are we're very concerned, if I'm to be honest. We've had a tremendous 5-year run in the States. We've got double-digit growth every year. It's on the back of a fantastic team that's driving the business across new customers, new products, new geographies, marketing campaigns, in-store tastings, and all of that is allowing us to build a very substantial business. However, there are already restrictions as to the amount of volume you can send in under quota. There's a possibility that could be changed and made more stark. There clearly is about a $1,500 a tonne penalty when you're importing over quota. Clearly that could become more expensive. But the overall business appetite for the US administration to support the US and US-based produced product versus imported from France, Ireland or Denmark is certainly a grave concern for us as we look into 17, but it's an unknown. We can't manage what we don't know, but yes, we are concerned.
Turning to the levy, during 2016 you decided, due to the low price of milk, you decided to suspend the levy for a period of time. Is it anticipated that you will reintroduce the levy in 2017, or what's the plan around that?
It's going to be a board decision. It's something we'll probably discuss together in March to June period, when you'd hope that we would be hitting that magical 30 cent a litre price. We're forecasting that that's the case, and we hope that happens for the good of Irish farmers. At that stage, we always said we would have another review 12-18 months from when we made the decision as to whether it's appropriate to reintroduce the levy at the same level and put that €7 million back into our funds to promote Irish dairy, or whether we would leave the levy suspended forevermore because the business might have the capability to make those investments itself. So it's not a decision that's been made. What we have agreed is that once we hit the magical 30 cent a litre, it will be subject to another board discussion.
Okay, Kevin, so I think the message is for farmers to be cautiously optimistic for 2017. There are lots of challenges ahead, but I think in the long term, I suppose the future is bright as well. So thanks very much, Kevin, for speaking to me today. Thank you.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Staying with dairy, County Cork dairy farmer and organiser of the Positive Farmers Conference is Michael Murphy, and he has claimed that clover and crossbreeding can boost farm incomes by at least 30%. Our dairy specialist Aidan Brennan met him to find out what he's basing this figure on.
I'm not just saying 30% extra profits, Aidan. I'm saying very, very conservatively 30%. In practice, we'll say that come along to the conference and the figures will actually be considerably in excess of 30%. And it's all based on known knowledge, and I'm absolutely standing over it. It's based on, we'll say, that research results in Ireland and some in New Zealand, where people are combine the use of crossbreds and grass clover. The results are just phenomenal.
So what's the added advantage of crossbreds and clover? I mean, explain a bit about it. Like, I mean, if I just go out and sow clover now, if I don't go crossbreeding, will I still get the advantages of it?
Conservatively, you'll add 400 to 500 euros per hectare. With the results from Moore Park and equally the results from clover, Clonakilty would suggest. So you will get a good percentage of the benefits from that. But when you combine it with crossbreds, the effects are they're literally off the scale. I have never in 50 years of farming, I've never seen anything that can make such a difference. In years of low milk price such as we just had, it's not a 30% lift in profits. It's more like 100% lift in profits.
Yeah, it's a massive claim to make, Mike. You're going to double your output, in terms of double your profit by having crossbreds and clover. Why aren't more dairy farmers doing it? I mean, what's holding them back? I know the research in Clonakilty is relatively new. And we've 3 years of it finished. Yeah. But I mean, crossbreeding is around a while. Like, I mean, what's holding people back?
It's an interesting question, and we'll say that when people actually realise that even the top 5 or 10% of farmers, who generally are in Holstein Friesian on grass, that will say that they can lift their profits by figures of something like 60 to 90,000 per every 100 hectares. It's in that range, and that penny hasn't dropped yet. Yeah, and I'm saying it is a fantastic comparative advantage to Ireland if we actually act on that information. Some of the information is relatively new, but some of it, as you say, the crossbreds, they have concerns about it, but they haven't actually looked at the full impact on farm profitability.
Yeah. You make up for a lot of that, the reduction in calf sales or cull cow value. Yeah. That's small in comparison to the advantages that you're saying you're going to get.
Yeah, the advantages I'm talking about, will say they're all absolutely backed up by very solid research.
But Mike, what are the limitations of clover? I mean, is it suitable to every type of soil? Location-wise, Clonakilty is a very good farm in a dry part of Ireland.
It is, yeah. I'd certainly, Aidan, would say that I'd be very, very cautious about clover and heavy soils. I actually think very heavy soils, I don't think clover will work. I think we'll say that just too much poaching. I would not recommend it in very heavy soils. So that's a big limitation. Yeah. And the other two, they are real concerns. One like bloat and the risks of bloat, we'll say, which are real. Once you actually decide to use clover, then you actually have to become good at managing it. But the Clonakilty results 0.6% mortality per year over 3 years in Moore Park. Zero mortality, I think, on clover and over the last number of years, show that the skills can be learned. It's a manageable problem. Second problem is, we'll say, the spring hole, because we'll say that you will have grass clover. Clover grows less over the winter, very little at all.
It dies back, if anything.
Dies back, yeah. So spring hole, but that can be countered by just calving 8 to 10 days later. That'll largely counter that. And the rewards for actually managing these problems are so large. When the prize is so big, it's crazy not to actually. I've never before heard in my life, Aidan, where people can make, again, I'll repeat the claim, more than 30% extra profits. And that's hugely conservative. I think the figure is far larger.
Excellent. Where can people hear more about this?
If people are interested, come along to the Positive Farmers next Wednesday and Thursday next week, 11th and 12th, at the Radisson Blue Hotel.
In Cork.
In Cork, Little Island, Cork. If you're interested, look up the Positive Farmers website and you can book on it.
Very good. Thanks, Mike, and best of luck with the conference.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
The first information meeting about the new €10 per ewe sheep welfare scheme took place in Dunmanway, County Cork this week. Tommy Miles was there, and he got the lowdown on what's involved for farmers wishing to enter the scheme with Michael Gottstein of Teagasc and farmer Neely O'Leary.
Tommy, I suppose the first thing really for our guys is to join the scheme. It's a useful scheme. There's €10 per ewe there. There's a number of tasks that the farmers have to complete, and they can choose. They have to choose two tasks that they're going to complete for the entire 4 years. So they can't change tasks during the year. So I suppose that's an important point. So when they're deciding on what tasks they're going to pick, that they consider those carefully. That they look at what they're already doing on their farm, maybe, and how those tasks fit in, and, that they can get a benefit from those tasks. not just that they're basically ticking a box to fulfill the requirements of the scheme, but also that they derive some benefit from it. So I suppose that's the main thing. There's a little bit of paperwork associated with it, record keeping and paperwork. It's not very onerous, and I think that's a very important message to get out there, that people aren't put off. Talk to your agricultural consultant or your geographic advisor if you need assistance in completing it, but by and large the paperwork side of it is pretty small. I think that those are the main messages. It's €10 a ewe. It's welcome for sheep farmers, and I suppose there's enough money there for every ewe in the country to qualify. So it would be a shame if an awful lot of the money went back into the RDP unspent on the sheep scheme because people didn't apply for it. There are some terms and conditions associated with the scheme, and in order to be eligible for it, the main thing really is that farmers need to put in their census on time. They need to put in the application form on time. They also need to have a basic payment application form, even if they're not claiming basic payment, which will be coming to them in May. So that's the important thing, I suppose, from the paperwork side of things. The farmers have to maintain the number of ewes for the duration of the scheme, and I suppose that's a challenge for guys. For farmers that are retaining their own replacements, ewe lambs, and that they have those on the farm, I don't see that as being a particularly big issue. Because most of the ewe lambs that are on farms will be probably hitting the 12 months of age market or in March, and they can be used then to replace ewes that either die or are culled out of the flock, at any stage. But certainly for the guys that are buying in their replacements as hoggets, they need to be a little bit smart in so far as maybe hold on to cull ewes a little bit longer, buy replacements a little bit earlier, or have a number of their own flock replacements to cover them for what they're going to be disposing of during the year, so that they can try and maintain the numbers.
Neil O'Leary. Tommy, I suppose, first of all, I'd have to say that we had a huge crowd here. There was a lot of information given out. As I said during the meeting, I have a few concerns. I suppose the biggest concern I have is the 2 days notice. It couldn't work in a hill situation if we got fog. They said they would be ringing people, but some people, particularly the mobile, the very poor service there, they may not be able to get them. Getting down the sheep in that much time in bad weather is near to impossible, especially in the spring. It was mentioned there about with the hill flock as well. If we're around lambing time, I hope they will be able to avoid that, because you have a lot of mismothering and that kind of thing if the lambs are very young and you put them into a yard and you bring them down. And that the other thing, and I feel strongly about it, the new entrance. He nearly said it, but he didn't. That's what I thought with the speaker. And I think there will be some leeway made there, because you could have somebody that went in last year, you could have somebody going in this year, you could have a fellow that took over from a non-sheep farmer, and that because he was working or something like that, it suited him better to go on with sheep. And I think we have to make provision for them, particularly if we're serious about it. There's a lot of the very old people who go to the mart in Kinmare, I go to mainly, and a lot of the people are my own age or thereabouts. It's very important to try and get young people into sheep in general. Because if that isn't done, so there should be an incentive there. Of course, as well, I would like to see, now that the scheme is bedded down and the regulations and the rules are written, I would like to see a top up for the hills, because it's in future years, and I'm sure we'll be lobbying the minister for to consider that, because the day of the one man and his dog and his stick, the people doing that are getting very scarce in throughout West Cork and South Kerry and the areas that I know.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Finally, it's the new year, and with it comes the inevitable New Year's resolutions. For a lot of people, managing time is the biggest challenge in today's world, with technology a major distraction for most. Margaret Hawkins from Irish Country Living looks at the issue in this week's magazine, and she goes through some of the main points with consumer editor Ciara Leahy.
So it's the new year, and while we all might have resolutions of varying degrees, whatever they may be, the one thing that many of us need to achieve these intentions is time. And this is the focus of this week's article by Irish Country Living's health columnist Margaret Hawkins. Now, the 24 hours of the day are going to happen whether we like it or not, so we can't control time, but we can control how we manage that. And one of your first tips, Margaret, is doing an audit each week. Tell me more.
It's definitely a great idea. An audit, keep a diary for a week about actually how you use your time. And if, like me, you'll actually be very surprised about how much time you actually waste. And what I found out from speaking to the life coach, John McNamara, who's based in Limerick, was that you really just have to think about the vampires. And I'm talking about the time and energy vampires like technology and television. You know the way when the notifications come in on your phone, you look at it, or the notifications for emails, you look at it, but you can actually be distracted. And if you do that audit or that diary, you actually get a really good picture of where you are spending your time productively and maybe where you're spending it not so productively.
Yeah, because, I mean, we all know that to-do list can be endless if we want it to be. Tell me a bit more about that prioritising.
Well, just looking at what you need to do. There are some things you need to do and some things you mightn't feel like doing. But I always find when you force yourself to do the really hard thing first, the really difficult one, that it means that the stress kind of lifts quicker in the day because you know you've tackled what's been the most difficult. So just really to make that list. You're not going to get everything done. And I mean, we're all humans and things crop up, and there's no point in having a totally full list. You need to incorporate a little bit of free play into it as well, because things always do crop up. But just actually having that plan, it does help you to focus better.
Absolutely. Now, it's all well and good to say about focusing better, but distractions come in all forms. There is the very distracting internet, and especially with smartphones, that distraction can be 24/7. So tell me about how we can manage our time and try and not get gulped into that technology warp.
That's a big thing, and I was finding that I was very distracted by my smartphone there lately, and I have a couple of news apps which are really important to keep you up to date with what's going on in the world, but I decided that I would switch off the notifications. You can go into settings and do that for each particular app you have. So say if you have one for a news station or whatever, you could decide that you don't want notifications coming in, that you don't want to hear what the last thing that Donald Trump said was. So you sort of dilute the stress a bit. So the distractions are there, and technology is a huge time vampire, I suppose. But we have to be, I suppose, disciplined about it. And it's about looking at what we can do to lessen those distractions.
And I suppose achieving this is about having the power to say no.
Saying no is a big thing. We can all do that. I find sometimes I have a family member, a sister who's a different schedule to me. Say she's a teacher, and she might ring up and say, I'll be in such and such a place. Do you fancy meeting up for a cup of coffee and a chat and so on? And I'm there with a different schedule where I wouldn't finish until later in the day. And I'd be tempted and say, well, I suppose I could. But then you have to think, for your own sake, you have to have the discipline to say, well, I can't actually do it today. I could do it on Thursday or Thursday evening or wherever, when I'm a bit freer. So it's, even though sometimes you don't want to turn down any kind of an invitation, the reality is to get on with your work and kind of to get through what you have to do. You have to have the courage to say no.
And I think a very good question you had in it was, you need to ask, what am I going to get from this? The last question, Margaret, is the last tip applies to everything in life. It's not just about the big changes, but the small daily changes that really make a difference.
That is it. Most people think you have to have this absolutely huge change, some cataclysmic decision to make a difference in your life. But it's not. It's the same as if you're trying to improve how you're eating, that you cut out X and Y particular junk food that you used to eat. if you do the same in a time sense, that maybe you reduce how much television you look at, or maybe you don't spend as much time on checking emails so often and so on, or checking Facebook or whatever, that there is so much time there that you can use more productively. It's just really having a really good look at how you use your time and learning to manage it better.
Great stuff, Margaret. Thank you so much. And that is in this week's Irish Country Living.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie, on the Irish Farmers Journal app and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.